Hey, my name is Chelsea Fagan, and I'm the founder and CEO of The Financial Diet, a totally independently owned and operated company of women who love to talk about money. Welcome to The Financial Confessions, a weekly show where we talk to people about their personal finances, their professional industry, and how money shapes their lives. You can listen to or watch new episodes of The Financial Confessions every week on YouTube or your preferred streaming platform. You can also support TFD and get exclusive access to our entire catalog of ad-free bonus videos, workshops, Discord community, our book club, and more by joining our members-only community on Patreon or YouTube. Our 2024 goal is to be primarily supported by our incredible community, and joining our membership program is the best way to do that. Enjoy the episode. Hey everyone, and welcome to our season finale of The Financial Confessions. As has become a bit of a tradition, I'm ending the season by talking to you guys. This was a unique season for us in that we only spoke, or I guess primarily spoke to quote unquote real people, which is always a strange term because obviously even people who have a public platform or a lot of money are also real people. And, just because they have those things doesn't necessarily mean they don't have, financial problems or things to talk about. But it was definitely something that we had been hearing for a long time coming into this season that you guys wanted more. People with, everyday jobs, middle class incomes, people who are struggling financially. We interviewed, people who were living out of their vehicle, people who are on disability, nurses, teachers, all of those kind of things. And I'm really glad that we did. I was a little nervous because, frankly, when you're very used to speaking to people who themselves are used to speaking on public platforms, it's just like a little bit more certain that the conversation will flow in a certain way. Although, to be honest, I think looking back at some of our interviews over the years, I think a lot of people with public platforms or who are financially secure are not used to talking about money. Like they just don't necessarily have a lot of experience with it. It's not a question they're asked about a lot. So we have had in the past, prior to this season, people who've come on the show and talked about, the issues we normally talk about. And the audience reaction has been very negative to them. I'm not going to specifically name any names here. But we've had people say really tone deaf things or, not really be aware of, their financial privilege or things like that. And, we always want to strike a balance between editing people in a way that's, fair to them and not unnecessarily putting them on blast. But we also don't want to censor what people say. So although interviewing quote unquote real people was a little nerve wracking in the sense of, a lot of people just aren't used to being interviewed if that's not part of their day-to-day life, it was kind of a relief knowing that for the most part, they're speaking about issues that are just kind of inherently a lot more relatable to the average person watching. I really particularly enjoyed doing the interview about wedding culture. I still think all the time about that woman getting charged $700 for a Sprite and paying it, which I think is the more wild part of that anecdote. I think, even in my most people-pleasing moments, I don't know that I would have coughed up the money. But either way, it really is interesting to kind of see how these conversations are unfolding. Anecdotally, in my own life, my cousin is having a destination wedding next year. And I am so used to just that being, an expense that you take on and based on your proximity to the person or, maybe whether they attended your wedding or what have you, you just kind of expect to take the hit financially. And it wasn't until I was actually on the phone with my father talking about the logistics and I went to their wedding website for the first time to get details because I assumed they had gotten a room block. Lo and behold, they're covering accommodations, food, transit, everything for people for 5 days, which was honestly shocking in a positive way. I mean, I think, that's what we did because we had a destination wedding, very small group of people. But it's not something I necessarily expect other people to do. And I was obviously very pleasantly surprised. I texted him that's so cool, blah, blah, blah. Thank you. But it is interesting, looking at that moment, it's weirder that we would just expect, like offhand, to pay between airfare, on the ground travel, lodging, and some food if we stay beyond just the wedding itself, easily $3,000 for a couple, probably more when you count all of the little odds and ends. It's just kind of weird that socially we've gotten to a place where that is the more normal expectation. That's the more sort of automatic default. And the opposite, where I mean, we're still going to have to pay for airfare and things like that and incidentals. But the idea of it being covered is so out of the norm that it kind of, it takes you aback. And I say that to say, having the conversation with, the 3 different people for the wedding series, that was something that I don't know that we would have done in a regular season, but reading the comments on it, and we also covered this a little bit in our June video essay, like reading the comments about where things like wedding culture have gotten us, I think 90% plus of people feel the same way, that it's gotten out of control, that it's not sustainable financially, that, we should not be putting these expectations on each other, even if, someone can afford it, quote unquote. It's not necessarily a fair thing to ask of them. And yet, we don't necessarily see the changes happening in real time. So kind of getting to be a part of that conversation felt really good. And I hope we have more of them, because I think, unfortunately, with things like the social spending, the travel spending, the wedding spending, these things aren't really going to change unless there is a social pressure to change. And the first part of that social pressure is just kind of speaking honestly about these things. Anyway, shout out to my cousin. You're a real one for that. Very excited. I've never been to Tuscany, so I'm really excited to be #under the Tuscan sun. Also, God bless for doing it in June, because I have not been to one. Well, I've been to Italy. This is a total digression, but I've been to Italy in July and August. Never again. I mean, it is truly 100 degrees every day in certain parts of, especially Sicily was out of control. And I know more than one person who's been to a July or August wedding in Italy, and they nearly died. There's no air conditioning there. I mean, in most places. Those are all digressions, but okay. So we asked for questions from the audience. So we are just doing a little Q&A to end the season. Let's get into it. How would you spend your birthday alone? I love doing things alone. I'm someone who loves traveling alone, loves doing day trips, staycations, eating, going to the movies, going to the museums. I like doing many things alone. If I were to spend my birthday alone, I would probably do like a weekend trip by myself on like the train, go out to, the beach or upstate to the, not the mountains really, but, some little upstate little town. And just kind of, bring some really good books, go to some cute restaurants, do a little shopping, museums. Wouldn't reinvent the wheel. But that being said, I just want to say, as the side note, people need to get into socializing alone more, and especially traveling alone more. I think in some ways, part of the social spending crisis that we're in is because, so much of our spending decisions are being really kind of, weighed on by friends, group chats, social media, all these other, outside influences that are not necessarily representative of the things that we would choose to spend our money on. And sometimes these things align perfectly and people want to go to the same places and want to do the same things. But it's really worth checking in with yourself that you're getting to actually do the things you want to do with your experience spending, and that it's not always just kind of redounding to whatever the group is choosing. How to deal with anxiety beyond meds and therapy. Any books or movies specifically that helped you? Yeah, I mean, a lot of books. I'm actually rereading a book called How to Change Your Mind, The New Science of Psychedelics. That's not the subtitle, but it's something like that. I really like alternative therapies in that regard, and just kind of reading about the human brain as kind of an abstraction. I like reading, and some of it is like very pop sci, Malcolm Gladwell type vibes. Not that book. How to Change Your Mind is an exceptional book. But I generally like books about brain science for the purpose of things like anxiety, because I think the for me anyway, the most effective way to think of it or to deal with it is to realize that it's irrational, that it's your brain acting a fool, and just kind of responding in a way that is not regulated, that is not, it's not of your higher brain. It is responses that you can't necessarily control and that are not attuned to the world that we live in and not attuned to whatever circumstances happen to be making you anxious. I actually made a video yesterday about how when I was first in therapy for anxiety, one of the things that we talked a lot about was just kind of trying to intellectualize the responses of guilt or panic, which are two really, really common responses in anxiety, where you sort of, your brain expends a lot of emotional energy on these negative emotions that don't actually accomplish anything, are not actually in any way helping the situation or making amends or preparing or doing any of the things that would actually offset guilt or panic. But they're, natural responses. And again, our brains evolved in a circumstance that has literally nothing to do with the current circumstance that we live in. Like everything happening on our phones, our brains are not built for that. We can't necessarily even understand what our brains are doing because they're just not, they didn't develop in an era of smartphones. Like I didn't even grow up with this as a child. So trying to intellectualize it and trying to understand the brain chemistry, the evolution of the human brain, why we're having these responses, and really accepting that they are irrational and they are maladaptive. I personally, this is another digression, but I understand that for a lot of people, the rhetoric around like my neurodivergence or mental illness or whatever it may be is like my superpower or whatever. I understand that for some people that feels affirming or helpful. I think it's okay though to not feel that way. I do not feel that way. I prefer to be as, and it's not even a question of like normal or, healthy or any of those words. It's just about like well-adjusted, able to adapt to situations, able to respond in a thoughtful way, able to take your time, able to overcome impulses that are not necessarily serving you. I think it's okay to separate yourself from issues your mind is having with dealing with certain things and not necessarily needing to integrate it into your identity or your sense of self. I think both can be fine, but I think there is kind of a pressure sometimes to make it almost a personality trait. And I just personally don't like that at all. And it's helpful to me to separate myself somewhat from that aspect of my brain. Because at the end of the day, like, we're just, animals, and our brains are, evolved the way any other animal's brains are evolved. They can help us or they can sabotage us, and it's all about how we learn to adapt. If you had just one piece of financial advice to share, what would it be? Look at your money every day. Like, be aware of it, have it easily on your phone, have a bird's eye view of your finances at all times available to you, and check it frequently. This isn't just like very well demonstrated to help people with making better financial decisions, saving more, investing more, etc. It's also very good for like being on alert for things like fraud, or what I like to think of as like self-fraud, where you spend on things you probably shouldn't be and would regret if you were to confront them more regularly. I think we have a tendency when we spend in ways that we don't think we should, is like we don't look at our bank accounts, or we try not to overly investigate, for example, when we're on vacation or on a night out or whatever the case may be, or a birthday, like we don't really investigate those purchases because we're like, I know nothing good is waiting for me on those statements. And I do think that forcing yourself to confront your own sort of habits and tendencies financially is one of the most important things you can do. Are you still happy with your decision to self-publish your debut romance novel? Sure am, and I'm self-publishing my next one. First of all, I just like really have enjoyed the process a lot more, and creatively it was a lot more fulfilling. And I like having all of the IP for things like licensing or, anything like that. But also it's just really nice to like create something, and like it's become like a pretty solid source of monthly income for me. And A, that's like great financially, but also B, I think for a lot of us who work in, media or publishing or any of those spaces, we're so used to kind of the concept of you put something out, it lives for a minute, and then you move on and have to do the next thing. And that's often how we're compensated. So to have all of those royalties and to have that, monthly check for work that I did a year plus ago, is just, I don't know, it's a great feeling. And you can theoretically get checks like that for traditional publishing, but like we've sold over 250,000 copies of the first Financial Diet book, and like our royalties, even after earning out the advance and everything, have never been anything close to royalties that I've gotten from self-publishing, just because the percentages you get are orders of magnitude higher. So yeah, it's been fab, 10 out of 10. Can't wait to do it again. And this time I'll waste a lot less money because I've already figured out, I learned a lot of my lessons, let's just say, on the, trial and error of marketing and publishing and printing and distribution and all that. So it's going to go a lot better this time. It was already great before, better this time. If you have a 401k account with Fidelity, would opening another with Vanguard be a bad idea? No. I have a 401k and a non-retirement investment account in with two different providers, and one of them is Vanguard, actually. No, that's not a bad thing. Usually, generally speaking, you don't get to choose where your 401k is. So, if you like it, great, open another account with them. But if you could possibly, if another, that being said, like for the most part, most of these funds that you're talking about are going to be pretty similar across all of these different banks. But I would just, look to what is most intuitive to you. If you can get maybe a slightly better rate, and also if, the back end is more, easy for your brain to work with. There are ones that I like better or less, that I find easier to understand or less easy, but yeah. What should someone do with a large sum of money if they're debt-free, i.e. inheritance? Invest it. Invested in well-diversified funds that will generally yield the highest returns, most consistent returns rather, with the lowest annual fees. If you don't own property and that's something that you want to do and fits into your current plans, buying a primary residence could be a good option as well. But do keep in mind that real estate is more complicated than just investing in the market, and it can be a great idea, but there's a lot of ifs with real estate. So for example, when you're looking to buy a home, I would not buy a home unless you're basically sure that you can live in that home for the next 10 years at least. You may be able to sell it earlier, but real estate markets can be very volatile, as can things like mortgage interest rate markets and things like that. So you just want to be sure that you can sell at a moment that's good in terms of equity. You also want to ideally be buying a property in an area that's appreciating, at least at the average level in the US, if not better. You want to be sure that your income is going to be consistent enough to support that mortgage in the medium to long term. So, it can be a good idea to also buy a home, but I think, again, and we've talked about this a lot at TFD, but like people tend to present home buying as a lot more of a sure thing than it really is. And I think I would just encourage everyone to really think about what is best for their life rather than treating owning a home as a must and working backwards from there. Favorite book series as a kid? My favorite book as a kid was The Phantom Tollbooth. My favorite book series as a kid, I liked Redwall. I still get hungry thinking about those books. They're just describing all the feasts they're always eating. I loved Redwall. I liked the Angus Thongs and Full Frontal Snogging series. That was a banger. Like most basic American children, I was obsessed with British things. So I love that. I loved... I have to say it, Harry Potter. And I have to say, too, I don't think the kids these days have a phenomenon quite like Harry Potter, and I don't think bookstores represent the same things for kids today as they did for us, because we just didn't have the same access to, I guess TikTok or whatever else kids are watching. But like those memories of like dressing up in my little wizard outfit and like waiting at midnight at the bookstore and then staying up all night to read the new book, like I don't know, that such wonderful memories, and I hope children are still doing that. Obviously, as someone who doesn't want children, it's not my place to make assessments about screen time and things like that. Although there are many studies out there that I would suggest brushing up on. But I do hope that even for kids who are spending a lot of time on screens, that, they're still getting those magical experiences with books. Very unfortunate that J.K. Rowling turned out to be the person that she is. But I will say this, and do I say it as a huge Woody Allen fan? Probably. But I think the whole conversation about separating the art from the artist is, very American. Smoke cigarette. I think it's silly, right? Like, if you think about great art and how many people who have produced that great art are uncompromised ethically, morally, as people, like, we don't have a lot to work with. Like, literally name a music biopic about a very well-established musician whose canon is beloved. Literally almost none of them are good people, like by the standards of like what we would consider to be a good person or an ethical person. And do I think that there should be limits? Of course. Like, if Woody Allen drops another movie, I'll illegally download it. I'm not going to give him money. And I actually don't really watch his new stuff anyway. But do I like need to retroactively like pretend that I don't love his work? No. And do I also think that, like, again, name any other number of people whose work is beloved who were not good people? Do I think I have to like scrub my brain and pretend that I don't enjoy those things? No. And do I think that we need people to be, consistently good in order to enjoy their artistic output? Also, no. I think the need for us to make superheroes out of celebrities, first of all, and artists is silly. But anyway, all of this is to say, with J.K. Rowling's nonsense, I understand totally. Like, I don't engage with new Harry Potter products, because I'm 35 years old and it's a little weird to me, people my age who are still obsessed with like children's shit. But I wouldn't anyway, because I don't want to support her financially. But that being said, I don't think anyone should feel bad. Like, you could go back and reread a Harry Potter book if you wanted to. You don't have to feel bad about having loved that as a child, having it been a huge part of your experience. And I just don't think we should put the pressure on ourselves to only enjoy or celebrate art from people who are good. I think that that's like a silly standard. Also, once you get past a certain point in history, like, I don't know, anyone who's producing art before like the 1970s, I guess, or even 80s, like, they had some wild ideas, right? I mean, like, was Mozart a good person? Was Bach a good person? Was Shakespeare a good person? I don't know. Where does it end, I say? Was Shakespeare even Shakespeare? That's the real tea. Will you consider extending your Housewives podcast with Erin to more episodes? Absolutely. We're definitely going to do that because we have things to discuss. Okay. Why do you have separate finances with your husband, and how does it work for you? I don't have totally separate finances. We, a fair amount of our finances are collective, but I have a lot of separate finances just because I don't really want to I just don't want to feel like we have to be like co-signing on every financial decision for each other. And also, I just like, as a woman, it gives me a lot of mental security to know that like I have a lot of money that is just under my name. Now, obviously, as a married couple in the state of New York, if we get a divorce, like, our assets will be divided along, the lines that we've agreed on. And a lot of this stuff will be treated as collective. Like, our home is a collective asset. We have a lot of collective assets, but I still think it's important as a woman to have things that are immediately accessible and are yours alone. So yeah, but I don't know. I just also, I've always, and I know I've talked about this before on the channel, but I'm going to say it again. And the more I have people around me, women especially, getting older, getting into a different phase of their lives, um, the more important I think it is that marriage and romantic partnership in general always be a very proactive choice rather than a financial necessity or obligation. That's not always possible, but if it's possible to be very financially independent and solvent and savvy and be able to take care of yourself and be able to have your money, um, that the effect of that is that it means that you being in that relationship is a proactive choice that you get to make um, on your own terms rather than sort of having to go along with it. I think a lot of heterosexual marriage is really bad, or at least mediocre. Like, I do think a lot more women, and women talk about this all the time. Like, I think more and more women are beginning to experience this, that a lot of hetero marriage for women can be a very losing proposition. And I just think that the more women have that access to independence and self sufficiency, the more of an active choice that marriage will be, and the more leverage they have to set their own terms. So, yeah, I would encourage all women to have as much financial independence as possible if they're in a hetero relationship, especially. And again, it's not always possible, but if it's possible for you, I think that's a very important mental and emotional exercise. How do I beat inflation? It is currently kicking my ass. There's only one way, and that's to earn more money. Generally speaking, the best way to earn more money is going to be to increase your compensation at your primary job. It looks like you're a woman. Most women, on average, women negotiate far less than men do. They often are being underpaid, not just in comparison with men, but for what they're doing at a given company versus what they could be earning for the same job at a different company, especially if they have been at the company for longer than a few years. Women do also tend to be more loyal to jobs, to professional situations. So first and foremost is either negotiate more compensation at your primary job or start looking for another employer, because usually those are when you'll realize your biggest increases in salary or base income. And then on top of that, you can take on, other side gigs, side streams of income. Another way to beat inflation is invest. Investing is not a perfect hedge to inflation, but it's a lot better than a savings account. So that's another place to put your money. Someone says, how do I begin investing in stocks? If you know 0.0% of what to do for investing in stocks, my advice would be to start with a robo-advisor, because it makes the entire process of investing extremely intuitive and basically impossible to mess up. So I would start there. And then as you get more savvy with it, you can start branching out to more actively managed investment accounts. But yeah, robo-advisors are great to start with. What are your favorite places to write in New York City? Hotels, always hotels. I love writing in hotels. I hate writing in coffee shops. I think the vibes in coffee shops are cursed. Everyone's always so stressed out and anxious and honestly tweaking on caffeine. And there's always such a pressure to buy more things or leave. And also it's becoming more and more common for laptops to say no, or for coffee shops to say no laptops. This happened to me twice this weekend, which literally I went to a coffee shop in my neighborhood and it was like no laptops on weekends and there was nobody in there. And of course I didn't go in. I'm not going to disobey and use my laptop, but I'm also just like, guys, we are dying for third spaces. And I understand if there's a ton of people waiting for a table, not to just squat forever and not really buy much, but I would have bought a fair amount of things. And there were so many open tables. Can't I just hang out and work? But in hotels, there's never a pressure to rush yourself or to not take up space, because people are often spending all afternoon there, whether they're waiting to check in or waiting for a flight or things like that. It's very transient. You see all different kinds of vibes. It's not that much more expensive than a coffee shop. I'll usually get a large bottle of sparkling water and a cappuccino, and I can sit there for several hours, and it's, with tip, it's probably under $20. Also, you see people cheating on their spouses in there. There's just a lot of very interesting people watching weird stuff, especially on the Upper East Side. The vibes there are always very Lynchian to me, these very liminal spaces where people are coming in and just behaving in a strange way. You see a lot of glamorous outfits, a lot of people who look like they're up to monkey business. Yeah, it's a really good vibe. Although one time I really did humiliate myself. There's a hotel downtown and I can't remember what the name is. It's like a very, very, very upscale hotel. It's in like Greenwich Village. It's got like a really beautiful fireplace. Anyway, I went to this really, really nice hotel. And I like walked in and I like sat down and I, took out my computer and I was just waiting for the waiter to come by. And this like man, this like maitre d' comes up to me and he's like very discreetly, he's like, "Miss, could I have your room number, please?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm not staying at the hotel. I was just gonna get a bite and a coffee or whatever." And he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry. This is actually only for hotel guests." And I was like, "Okay." And so I had to like pack my stuff up and leave, walk back through like the winding lobby, just everyone staring at me. It felt like the grounded version of walking past first class to get to coach. How do you balance paying off loans while saving? Well, you have to walk and chew gum. There are very good calculators that will help you determine what you can do, like paying loans versus investing calculators, which will help determine based on the terms of your loans, the current market conditions, sort of the right ratio of how much to put toward loan payoff versus investing, to just be more financially interesting in the long run. So I would use one of those calculators. How do you feel your hosting has changed since before and during the pandemic? And are there elements of hosting gatherings that you don't see anymore that you'd like to bring back? I wouldn't really say it's changed that much. I definitely appreciate it more. I love having it and in my life. Also, lest we forget, the pandemic for me was also 2 years of my husband not living in the country. So it was a very distressing time. So just having the whole squad together and having people over now feels even more delightful than it did beforehand. I actually had a really good dinner party this weekend. That was so much fun. And yeah, I appreciate it now more than ever. Life insurance? Opinions? Yes. Major opinion is that whole life insurance is a scam. And we have a great episode of Too Good to Be True that goes into that in detail that we'll link in the description. But yes, I think it can be a very important thing. We have life insurance, my husband and I. So if you see him drop dead anytime soon, you'll know why. No, I'm kidding. No, but we have life insurance, and it can be very important to have, especially, if you're young and have people that you want to be cared for in your absence. But some of it is a scam. So choose wisely and listen to Too Good to Be True. How's the TFD business going? Very well. Compared to last year, flawlessly. I want to buy a place I've been renting for years. How to approach the landlord? I mean, I've never just asked a landlord, "Hey, can I buy this place?" But I would imagine you just straight up say, "Hey, I would love to buy this place. Is that something you'd be interested in exploring?" But you have to accept that they may not want to sell, or they may not want to sell on terms that would be agreeable to you. But never hurts to ask is the way I treat all financial, adventures. What to do when friends make poor financial decisions and leave you feeling isolated? You need to accept that you can't control anyone else's financial decisions besides your own. And especially as you get older, you need to accept that some level of financial compatibility is going to be crucial for friendships, especially intimate friendships, people you might travel with, people who are going to play a big role in your life, people that you might rely on, or vice versa. Being very financially irresponsible has a lot of knock-on effects in all aspects of a person's life, and especially in their relationships. And if you're friends with someone whose finances are creating chaos for them, are making life very difficult, are bleeding over into your friendship, like, yes, you can try and have a conversation with that person and try and, offer any resources you might be able to, or advice, or, lessons that you've learned, or things that have been helpful to you, or whatever the case may be. But ultimately, as a friend, it's really not your place to manage their finances. And it's up to you to accept that only someone with whom you share at least some level of financial values and compatibility is probably going to be able to be a close friend long term. This is like a me thing, but I very much I've always struggled with people, with women specifically. And this is not necessarily always fair, especially, once couples have children. It's totally understandable that women, might make the decision to, remove themselves from the workforce partly or entirely. And, that's women shouldn't be required to work. And I don't think they are. But I've always personally struggled in friendships, especially close friendships with women who are in heterosexual partnerships where they abdicate 100% of their financial planning, responsibility, future, all of that to their husband. I find it, quite frankly, a little triggering and upsetting, and I get very anxious on their behalf. And it's hard for me to bite my tongue in those situations, and it's hard for me not to have some level of, to be honest, judgment about it, because I feel like it's, whether or not you're even contributing financially, that should not absolve you from having to take an interest in your own financial future and protect yourself. And women have historically worked very hard in this country and around the world to emancipate themselves financially and to have even the ability to take care of their own finances, or to have a say in their finances. So when I see women who are just kind of hitting autopilot and not taking that responsibility on, I do struggle to be close with that personally. I'm not really close with straight men to begin with as friends, so that's not a problem on the other side. Although if a man were in a relationship like that too, I would have the same feelings. But for women, that is something I've struggled with. And I've learned through the years that it's probably better for me to, just not necessarily ratchet those friendships up to a very close level, because it will be difficult for me not to be stressed out by it. And it's ultimately none of my business. They're allowed to do whatever they want. Hi, my husband and I are trying to balance saving for bougie travel versus home. I mean, there's no secret sauce, right? Like, you have to do both. And obviously finding the best places to put your savings accounts. I think Ally right now has the best interest for high yield savings accounts. Just kind of creating like a general sense of, prioritization is very important. Having your sinking funds. I generally recommend taking on any kind of extra income you can during that time to help put it exclusively towards travel and things like that, because travel can be quite expensive. Bougie travel, though, there's a difference between travel and bougie travel, and I don't know what bougie means to you, but I will say if things like nice hotels, flights, things like that are important to you, you are the prime candidate for things like card hacking, points hacking, getting really, really into all of those kinds of sort of, arbitrage level ways to approach travel and purchasing things. There are tons of great resources for people who like to travel at a certain level and want to optimize, like, for example, filtering all of your purchases through certain cards and immediately paying it off in full, just to rack up a ton of points, a ton of miles, things like that. Those are all, really good solutions available. But ultimately, at some level, you will have to save more. And so, yeah. Where is Mona? At home. I've really been going through it lately because Mona has had some minor health concerns. She has a heart murmur. So she's going to get an echocardiogram at the end of the month because she has to be put under for her teeth cleaning. And her teeth have also presented some problems lately. So, she's going to be 10 in October. She's not the puppy she once was, although you wouldn't know it being around her. But dealing with the mortality of a dog is it's a real thing. So I'm not gonna say that it's anywhere on par with a human, but dogs are very special, especially for people who don't want children. An animal, a dog especially, takes a very special place in your life. And Mona, it's not just any dog. She goes everywhere with us. She does everything with us. She's our shadow. And our lives will change a little bit when she's no longer able to to hang the way she once was. So, it's something I'm thinking about a lot. But overall, she's great. She's really cute. She doesn't love this weather. It's been like a heat index of 100 degrees every day, so she can't be outside very much, especially with her little heart flutter. So, we'll see. But waiting for the results of the test at the end of the month. Would love your thoughts about planning to get married to someone who has a lot of debt. Well, the most important thing to decide is how you will treat that debt collectively. I highly, highly, highly recommend a prenup in this case, and to very, very thoroughly address how you plan to divide any kind of debts and liabilities, and to what extent it's going to be your responsibility to pay for them. I have a good friend who herself paid off basically all of her husband's student loans, and in no way felt kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? And it didn't feel like an obligation. She did it out of love and wanting to, treat their finances as jointly as possible. That's one choice. Another choice is to keep it quite separate and to not take on the debt to the same extent. But all of those things really need to be decided, and you need to be very, very clear with yourself and with your partner to what extent after marriage this debt is considered your debt, joint debt. What's a good amount of money to have in savings? I work 2 jobs. One is 15 an hour, one is 20. In general, we always recommend in savings to have at least 3 months of base living expenses saved up. So whatever that is for you. For me, I typically prefer to have a lot more than that available in cash. But I think 3 months is definitely the minimum for an emergency fund. When is the next book coming? I have 2 books coming out next year, another romance novel and a book about hosting and entertaining. So next year. Should the layperson use a financial advisor or learn enough to manage their own money? You could do either, but ultimately financial advisors are typically for the layperson. If you're yourself a financial expert, you probably wouldn't be looking at using a financial advisor. So that's really what they're for. My husband and I use a financial advisor, and we're both pretty savvy with money, but I think ultimately it's not just about someone who can help you. It's also about sort of outsourcing some of the brain power of, things like your investment allocations, your long-term planning, things like that. It's just nice to have someone else who can help with that. It feels, and it also adds structure to it. Like we have our monthly check-in, or quarterly check-in, and we can bring our list of questions. We look over where we're pacing with our various goals, all of that kind of thing. And I think that is something that, at least for the way my brain works, is very, very helpful and makes managing long-term money feel more accessible and more, more like an integrated part of my life. But yeah, it's up to you. As a last question, what do you do when you've done a pretty good job saving money, but now you struggle to spend it? One thing that I would really recommend is to put a certain portion of your money each month or each paycheck or whatever it is into a specific account that is just for you, that is just for spending, and really treat it as like, this is kind of the money I have to spend on myself. I think by having that set amount that is dedicated to spending on yourself and knowing that the rest of it is being saved well, invested well, is already handled, and this is just kind of what's left over, I think at least mentally that can be very, very helpful. Unfortunately, that was never my problem, and it is probably the better problem to have long-term financially, is that you're too good at saving and too prudent and too frugal. But I do think ultimately, I think in any financial goal or decision, having dedicated accounts for different things is always the way to go, because that way your brain can already sort of process the fact that it has been accounted for, and you don't need to decide in the moment what it's going towards, because having to decide where your money is going, I mean, you could struggle endlessly with those decisions. So reducing some of that decision-making load and therefore fatigue is, I think, always the way to go. But yeah, those were just some of the questions you guys asked me. This has been another wonderful season of TFC. I was so happy to do it. So happy to talk with all of these cool people and their cool lives. And I've been really loving the video essays. I hope you guys have been enjoying them. Obviously, they're, People seem to really like them. They're, the views are great, and especially the comment sections on them are always such a fascinating little forum. And so we're just really excited to be able to keep doing this content that we love. And so thank you. And we will see you back here very soon for all the cool new stuff we have cooking up on the channel. Bye. Thank you so much for joining us, and be sure to tune in next week for an all-new episode of The Financial Confessions. The Financial Confessions is created by The Financial Diet and hosted by me, Chelsea Fagan. It is produced by Alexa Brooks-Majors and Holly Trantham. Recording and editing by Emily Fisher, and music and sound effects are from Epidemic Sound. Want more of our content? Head over to our YouTube page, The Financial Diet, to see our monthly deep dives, videos of this show, and our entire backlog of videos and podcasts. I'll talk to you next week.